The congressional hearing room fell silent as Pam Bondi strode confidently toward the witness table. The former Florida Attorney General's navy suit contrasted sharply with the polished wood of the chamber. For months, Representative Jasmine Crockett had dominated committee hearings with fiery accusations about election interference that no one could refute. Just moments earlier, Crockett had declared, "Republicans are undermining our democracy, and no one has the evidence to prove otherwise." The sharp attack had sent murmurs through the packed room, cameras flashing as Crockett basked in the spotlight. But what happened in the next 30 seconds not only stunned the entire committee, it completely upended Crockett's rising political career and may have altered the course of congressional oversight forever. Before diving into this explosive confrontation, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss our latest political analysis and breaking stories. For the past year, Representative Jasmine Crockett had been making headlines with her passionate speeches and pointed accusations. At 42, the charismatic Congresswoman from Texas had quickly established herself as a rising star, known for her bold claims and media savvy. With law degrees and a flair for dramatic committee performances, she had positioned herself as a fearless defender of voting rights and electoral integrity. Her target today alleged Republican interference in swing state elections. With the confidence of someone holding all the cards she had spent weeks building toward this hearing, promising irrefutable evidence that would expose the entire operation, Pam Bondi wasn't supposed to be her opponent today. At 58, the former Florida Attorney General had stepped away from the political spotlight after years of service. With her legal background and reputation for meticulous preparation, Bondi had built a career on substance rather than spectacle. She had served as Florida's first female attorney general and had been part of former President Trump's impeachment defense team, earning respect even from opponents for her disciplined legal approach. The hearing was supposed to feature a junior Republican lawyer whom Crockett had easily outmaneuvered in previous sessions. But at the last minute, Bondi had been called in a substitution that Crockett had dismissed with a wave of her hand and a whispered comment to her aide. Another desperate Republican move. Let's finish this quickly. What Crockett didn't know was that Bondi hadn't come empty-handed. For weeks, she had been quietly compiling information, documents, recordings, and testimonies that contradicted Crockett's central claims. This wasn't just about scoring political points. It was about constitutional integrity and factual accuracy. The stakes couldn't be higher. Crockett's political future, the credibility of congressional oversight, and public faith in electoral processes all hung in the balance as Bondi took her seat at the witness table, facing a room of legislators, journalists, and citizens who had no idea what was about to unfold. The oak-paneled hearing room hummed with anticipation as Pam Bondi arranged her documents at the witness table. Cameras clicked rapidly, capturing the moment as Representative Crockett leaned forward into her microphone, her bright red blazer drawing all eyes to her position of authority on the elevated committee dais. Miss Bondi Crockett began, her voice carrying the practiced confidence of a former trial attorney. "We appreciate your last-minute appearance, though I must note the irregularity of this substitution. Nevertheless, I'll get straight to the point." Crockett shuffled her papers dramatically, a move she had perfected for the cameras. "For months, we've been investigating electoral interference across 5 swing states. My office has documented at least 17 instances where Republican officials allegedly attempted to alter results. Would you agree this constitutes a threat to our democracy?" The question was a trap designed to force Bondi to either appear defensive or concede ground immediately. Several Democratic committee members nodded approvingly at the tactical approach. Bondi adjusted her microphone calmly. "Respectfully, Representative Crockett, I cannot agree with a premise that isn't factually established. I'd like to address each of those 17 claims individually if the committee permits." Crockett's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Miss Bondi, we don't have time for delaying tactics. A simple yes or no will suffice. The American people deserve more than simplistic answers to complex questions." Bondi replied, her voice steady, "Especially when careers and reputations are at stake." The committee chairman intervened. "The witness will be allowed to respond fully." As Bondi began methodically addressing the first allegation, Crockett interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "Miss Bondi, you're not answering my question." Let me be more specific. She held up a document dramatically. This affidavit from a county election official in Georgia claims direct pressure from Republican state leadership to find discrepancies in predominantly Democratic districts. Are you denying this occurred? The room tensed. Republican members shifted uncomfortably while Democratic allies of Crockett exchanged confident glances. This affidavit had been Harris widely reported, but never fully examined. Bondi didn't flinch. I'm familiar with that affidavit, Representative. In fact, I have something the committee may find interesting. She reached into her briefcase and produced a folder, sliding out a document that she placed on the display screen. This is a sworn statement from the same official, dated 3 weeks later, recanting key portions of that affidavit and clarifying that his words were taken out of context. A murmur rippled through the room. Crockett's expression flickered momentarily before she regained composure. That document isn't part of the official record, she counted quickly. It wasn't, Bondi agreed, which raises important questions about why exculpatory evidence was excluded from this committee's investigation. The chairman looked startled. Miss Bondi, are you suggesting evidence was deliberately withheld? Not suggesting anything, Mr. Chairman. I'm stating facts, and I have 16 more factual corrections to present Crockett's aid. Whispered urgently in her ear, the Congresswoman's face hardened as she tried to regain control of the narrative. Miss Bondi, one recantation doesn't invalidate the pattern we've established across multiple states? I agree completely, Representative Bondi replied, her calm demeanor unshaken, which is why I've compiled comprehensive evidence addressing each of your 17 claims. She produced a thick binder and began distributing copies to committee members. You'll find original documents, corrected timelines, and sworn testimonies that contradict key assertions made in previous hearings. The committee room grew increasingly tense. Journalists began frantically taking notes as Bondi systematically walked through 3 more allegations, presenting evidence that directly challenged Crockett's claims. Phone cameras captured the growing discomfort on Crockett's face images that would soon flood social media. Halfway through Bondi's methodical presentation, Crockett tried a new approach. While I appreciate Miss Bondi's perspectives, they represent a partisan viewpoint that nothing in my presentation is a matter of perspective. Representative Bondi interrupted, her voice firm but measured. These are documented facts, many from sources your own committee has cited in other contexts. A Republican committee member jumped in. Point of order, Mr. Chairman, is Representative Crockett suggesting that court documents and sworn statements are merely perspectives when they don't support her narrative. Cameras swiveled to capture Crockett's reaction. Her usual confidence was visibly cracking, but she wasn't giving up, Miss Bondi. She pressed, you were part of former President Trump's defense team. How can anyone view your testimony as impartial? It was the moment Bondi had anticipated a pivot to personal attack when the facts proved inconvenient. She looked directly at Crockett, her expression serious but not antagonistic. My background is public record representative, but these documents speak for themselves regardless of who presents them. The question is why they weren't included in your investigation from the beginning. The chairman, sensing the shifting mood in the room, tried to intervene. Perhaps we should take a brief recess to review these materials, but Bondi wasn't finished. Before we recess, Mr. Chairman, there's one more document the committee should see. She placed a final paper on the display screen, an email chain that made several committee members lean forward in shock. This exchange, which I've authenticated with digital forensics, shows that Representative Crockett's office was provided with the corrected information 3 months ago, but explicitly directed staff to exclude it from the committee's review. The room erupted. Several representatives began speaking at once. Journalists rushed for the doors to file breaking stories, and at the center of it all, Jasmine Crockett sat frozen, staring at the email, displayed for all to see. An email from her own account with the damning instruction, "Bury it doesn't help our narrative." As the chairman frantically called for order, the damage was already done. The 30 seconds it took for that email to be displayed had just changed everything. The chairman's gavel pounded repeatedly, struggling to restore order to a hearing room that had descended into chaos. Journalists were already streaming out, phones pressed to ears, breaking the story that would dominate news cycles for weeks. Committee members from both parties huddled with aides. some looking shell-shocked, others calculating political implications. At the witness table, Pam Bondi remained composed, her hands folded calmly over the evidence binder that had just upended months of carefully crafted narrative. Across from her, Representative Jasmine Crockett's face had drained of color, her usual camera, ready confidence replaced by a rigid mask of barely contained panic. When the room finally quieted, it was a senior Democratic representative who broke the silence. "Mr. Chairman, I move that we suspend this hearing pending a full review of Ms. Bondi's documents and verification of their authenticity." It was a lifeline thrown to Crockett, a chance to regroup away from the cameras, but Bondi wasn't finished. "While I respect the committee's procedures," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the tension-filled room, "I should note that every document I've presented has been authenticated by independent forensic analysts. The sworn statements have been notarized, and the email records have complete digital signatures and timestamps." She turned slightly to face Crockett directly. Representative Crockett has spent months telling the American people she had ironclad evidence of widespread electoral manipulation. She has made serious accusations against dozens of public servants. Today I've demonstrated that her claims were built on selectively edited testimonies, misrepresented documents, and in some cases, information her office knew to be false. Crockett finally found her voice, though it lacked its usual resonance. This is a coordinated attack on this committee's work. These so-called corrections are just another attempt to obstruct our investigation. Bondi didn't raise her voice or change her measured tone. The only obstruction here, Representative, was the deliberate suppression of exculpatory evidence by your office. That email wasn't fabricated. It came from your account with your digital signature, instructing your staff to hide information that contradicted your public claims. The chairman, struggling to maintain control, turned to Crockett. "Representative, would you like to respond to this specific allegation regarding the email?" All eyes in the room focused on Crockett. The cameras zoomed in as she visibly struggled to formulate a response. That email lacks context. We received thousands of communications that my staff filters. The email was from your personal account." Representative Bondi interjected quietly. "It was a direct response to your chief legislative aide, who had flagged the exculpatory evidence as something the committee should review." The room fell deadly silent. Even Crockett's strongest allies on the committee avoided eye contact. A Republican representative seized the moment. "Mr. Chairman, given the serious ethical implications of what we've just learned, I move that this committee refer this matter to the House Ethics Committee for immediate investigation." Murmurs of agreement came from both sides of the aisle. A devastating indication of how quickly Crockett's support was collapsing. Bondi then delivered the final blow that would be replayed on news networks for weeks. Representative Crockett once said that truth matters more than political convenience. I agree wholeheartedly. The truth revealed today isn't about partisan advantage. It's about the integrity of our congressional oversight system and public trust in our democratic institutions. She gathered her documents with deliberate care. When we allow political narratives to supersede factual accuracy, we damage not just our opponents, but the very foundations of representative government. The American people deserve better than carefully curated half-truths designed to inflame rather than inform. The cameras captured the precise moment when Crockett realized the extent of the damage her political brand had been built on: fearless truth-telling and holding power accountable. Now, in front of a national audience, she had been exposed for the very behavior she had made a career condemning. As the chairman announced a recess, Crockett remained frozen in her seat, aides frantically whispering in her ear. The political rising star who had entered the room with absolute confidence now faced the unthinkable: accountability for her own actions. Bondi, who had never sought the spotlight, found herself at the center of it. As she left the witness table, several committee members from both parties approached to examine her evidence more closely. The bipartisan nature of this response delivered a clear message. Crockett's tactics had crossed a line that even partisan loyalty couldn't defend. In the span of 30 minutes, Pam Bondi hadn't just challenged Crockett's claims, she had systematically dismantled them and exposed the deliberate manipulation behind them. The consequences would extend far beyond this single hearing. Within hours of the hearing's dramatic conclusion, der Bondi exposure in Attar Crockett emails dominated social media platforms. News networks scrambled to provide analysis as the full implications became clear. Political commentators who had championed Crockett's investigation now faced the uncomfortable task of acknowledging the deception. Major networks that had previously featured Crockett's claims prominently were now running fact-checking segments examining the evidence Bondi had presented. One prominent anchor opened their evening broadcast with a candid admission. Today we witnessed one of the most significant congressional hearing moments in recent memory, one that raises serious questions about information integrity in our political discourse. On cable news panels, legal experts weighed in on the potential ethical violations. What we saw today wasn't just political embarrassment, noted a former ethics committee counsel. The deliberate suppression of relevant evidence during a congressional investigation potentially violates House rules and could have serious consequences. By nightfall, Crockett's office had released a TUR statement. Representative Crockett takes the committee's work seriously and is reviewing the information presented today. She remains committed to electoral integrity and transparency. The carefully worded statement avoided addressing the damning email or the substantive challenges to her claims, but the damage control came too late. Several Democratic colleagues who had been vocal supporters of Crockett's investigation now distanced themselves. If these documents are authenticated, this represents a serious breach of our responsibility to the American people, said one senior representative who had previously championed Crockett's work. Inside the Capitol, political calculations were shifting rapidly. Committee members who had aligned themselves with Crockett's high-profile investigation now worried about associating with potentially tainted proceedings. 3 representatives publicly called for a thorough review of all evidence before the committee continued its work. By the following morning, the House Ethics Committee announced a preliminary inquiry into the allegations of evidence suppression. Political analysts noted the rare bipartisan support for the inquiry, a devastating indication of how Crockett's credibility had collapsed across party lines. For Pam Bondi, the aftermath brought unexpected attention. News profiles highlighted her methodical approach and commitment to factual accuracy over political theater. Bondi didn't just challenge Crockett's claims, wrote one analyst. She demonstrated the difference between evidence-based oversight and politically motivated spectacle. Conservative media celebrated Bondi as a hero who had exposed what they called political manipulation disguised as oversight. But even mainstream outlets acknowledged the significance of what had transpired. Regardless of political affiliation, noted a centrist publication, the deliberate exclusion of contradictory evidence undermines the oversight function that our democratic system depends upon. Social media amplified key moments from the hearing, with the most viral clip showing Crockett's reaction when confronted with her own email memes, comparing her confident opening statements with her stunned expression after Bondi's revelation spread rapidly across platforms. Political strategists recognized the lasting damage to Crockett's carefully cultivated image. She positioned herself as the fearless truth teller, explained one consultant. Being exposed for deliberately hiding inconvenient facts is the one thing her brand cannot survive. By week's end, the fallout had spread beyond Crockett herself. 2 senior staffers from her office resigned. The committee chairman announced a comprehensive review of all evidence and testimony from previous hearings, and several witnesses whose testimonies had been featured prominently came forward claiming their statements had been selectively edited. For many Americans watching from home, the incident reinforced growing skepticism about political theater comments. Sections filled with observations like "this is why people don't trust politicians," and finally someone bringing receipts instead of just making claims. Perhaps most significantly, the confrontation sparked broader conversations about congressional oversight and evidentiary standards. Editorial boards called for reforms to prevent selective presentation of evidence in committee investigations. Legal scholars proposed new protocols for authenticating and preserving testimony. In political circles, pulling a Crockett quickly became shorthand for being caught suppressing contradictory evidence. The congresswoman who had entered the hearing room as a rising political star now faced the difficult task of rebuilding trust, if that was even possible. The final blow came 10 days later when the committee released its preliminary findings. After thorough review, this committee has determined that significant exculpatory evidence was deliberately excluded from our investigation, compromising the integrity of our conclusions. The statement didn't mention Crockett by name, but it didn't need to. Everyone knew who had championed those conclusions, who had declared them ironclad, and who had now been exposed for manipulating the process. For Pam Bondi, who had never sought the spotlight, the experience reinforced her belief in the power of methodical preparation and factual accuracy. When asked about her motivations in a rare interview, she offered a simple explanation. Our system depends on truth, not convenient truth, not partial truth, but the whole truth. When we sacrifice that for political advantage, we damage something essential about American governance. The Bondi-Crockett confrontation would be studied in political science classes for years to come, a textbook example of how 30 seconds of irrefutable evidence can end a carefully constructed political narrative and potentially an entire career. As this political earthquake continues to reshape congressional oversight, one thing remains clear. In an era of carefully crafted messaging and selective information, Pam Bondi demonstrated that facts meticulously gathered and systematically presented still have the power to cut through the noise and hold even the most media-savvy politicians accountable. If you found this analysis valuable, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth political coverage. Comment below with your thoughts on how this confrontation might change congressional oversight going forward. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in our next analysis.